Hi folks, I'm Dan Peterson, and this is episode 6 of The Hole on the Corner, where we talk all things R.A. Lafferty. We've done 4 videos on all the novels. We're working our way through all his published work, and the last video was on the seminal collection from Lafferty, 900 Grandmothers of short stories, and we talked a bit about that. And we're moving on now to some more short story collections. And we'll try to pick up the pace here a little bit. But the next one, that was 1970 that Grandmothers came out. And then you've got, let me say a few other things about Grandmothers that I forgot to say on the last video. Just that, when I said my honorable mentions, I didn't mention the story 900 Grandmothers, and it very much is an honorable mention. But also when I suggested that when it comes back out again for Library of America or whatever, that we pad it out a little bit with a couple more 60s stories. Mainly, and maybe one 1970 story. I forgot about an obscure story that only ever came out in the New Mexico Quarterly. And this was an alternate route that Lafferty almost could have taken, because he had a few in the New Mexico Quarterly and maybe some others, I'm not sure. But they were essentially, you know, his very offbeat, tall tale infused brand of literary fiction. And there's this particular story called The Wagons, okay? And when I finally was able to get hold of that story and read it, it's one of my very favorites by Lafferty. And if when we put out 900 Grandmothers again, if we kind of let Lafferty breathe a little and kind of exceed the genre or genres of science fiction and fantasy and so on, I think we can it's fine. That's what a lot of it is, and a lot of it came out, and I have no problem with that. I like that in a lot of ways, but he is more than that. And I think if we kind of, there'll be an introduction and different things, and hopefully the right kind of artwork, that will make it not so strange to see a story in there that is not necessarily blatantly science fiction or fantasy. However, as usual with Lafferty's sort of literary type fiction, say The Devil is Dead, for an example, with a novel, there's a magical realism adjacent sort of feel to me, for lack of something better to say about it, to that kind of fiction that he does. And that would be the case with The Wagons, but it has all that sort of excess and funniness and on all that kind of thing that Lafferty's works have. So I think it fits well with 900 Grandmothers. And it's bioregional, it is ontological. It kind of has to do with, this is a big theme of Lafferty, big ontology versus small ontology, you might say, or multitudinous ontology versus minimalist ontology. But it doesn't use that kind of language. It's a very enfleshed sort of regional tale with stories and yarns and ethnicity, and also intergenerational things between a father and a son. That's just beautiful. It's beautiful. And it's just so cool. What a great story. And that should go in 900 Grandmothers. I don't have a physical copy. I can't show you anything about that, but it came out in 1960. Right, so let's move on. The next anthology or collection of Lafferty that comes out is in 1972. I lost my cover for this. Please do Google it. It is awesome. Actually, I do have it. I think it's stuck between some books somewhere. I preserved it. Strange Doings, 1972. Kind of got this like sort of like planet Earth with needles stuck in it. This is the cover I'm talking about. And like maybe a man sort of floating up or down from it. I can't remember. And like these like alligator, dragon, lizard sort of monsters reaching up toward it. And it captures pretty well quite a few different stories going on in this collection. And I wish more of his covers kind of had a vibe kind of like that, because it gives a little more idea of what you're going to get into and the coolness. So this starts with the story Rainbird. Okay, what a lovely tale by Lafferty. Again, I'm kind of gone from one to the other with The Wagons and Rainbird, talking about Lafferty. It's not something you terribly often say about Lafferty, though, it comes up frequently enough. And certainly with my emphases, I'm often just like the pyrotechnics, the weirdness, but he can be really poignant and really touching about life. He doesn't write in the traditional way with building characters and a lot of things. But his characters can be extremely memorable and stuff. And he can do psychological things and things about life by his own rules. Okay, so Rainbird is a time travel story, and there's something about Lafferty and time travel. I almost find it surprising initially that every time he touches time travel, he does something special, and thus we frustrate Charlemagne, collected in 900 grandmothers, a fan favorite. I do like the story quite a lot. It's just not, I don't rate it quite as highly as other people, but it's super cool what it does with time paradox. And there's some time travel in Pastmaster that I don't feel really gets into time paradox, but it's still cool the way it does it in its historical setting and a little bit of its little tech, the means by which the time travel happens or whatever. And there's various other places that he deals with time travel, and it's always something special. And I would say his two best short stories about time travel that just really add something to that trope are Thus We Frustrate Charlemagne and Rainbird. And Rainbird is got a lot going on, as Lafferty often does, and you don't always notice until you go to look at, analyze it, how many different strains he's packed into one story, especially when he writes one, because he can write quite raucously where you're a little more aware of how much is going on, and then he can write more compactly and smoothly in a way that you don't necessarily clock it. And this is a lovely, well-told, just sort of very complete little gem of a story about a young man flying his falcon. He's a falconer, flying his falcon up in the mountains so high he's up above the clouds, and the hawk goes out and hunts and so on. But the older version of himself had discovered time travel and comes back and gets him he's an inventor, and he gets him to take different pathways so that you get these, for a while, you get this alternate history where technology moves much, much faster, something Lafferty loves to do. And it's fun, it's exuberant with the lists of inventions. I love Lafferty's lists. And so on, and the recurring, it's got it's just so cool the way he does repetitions that create this different kind of storytelling that in many ways connects more to oral type of storytelling and so on. But it's so touching and profound because it ends up being sort of an old man's meditation on sort of time lost, time wasted, and on his younger self. Okay, that's somewhat familiar territory, but that's okay, that's cool. But in its time paradox, it actually ends up being a young man's meditation on his older self. What is that? And paths taken and not taken, and choices taken and then retaken. And it's a beautiful story. I love Rainbird. And when I first read it, it was back when I was hungrily looking for the next Lafferty tale that was going to just knock me right over with how bizarre and wonderful it was. And this one, I didn't exactly have patience for as I was reading it. I was like, nah, come on, knock me down already, But I was so surprised how much it just brought me in and sustained me to the end, and how touched I was by it by the end. And I was like, oh, I didn't know Lafferty could do that too. I'm so busy, and I realized I was missing a lot of him doing that. And so he does do that. It's got a story. The next one's called Camels and Dromedaries. Clem, with a comma there. Clem is a character. Great little split person story. He does a lot of split person type stuff. Really kind of gruesome ending that's really cool. Continued on next. Rock is a very famous story, and that's the name of Andrew Ferguson's blog on Lafferty that gets into textual history of these short stories that is very awesome. It's much loved. It's an archaeological tale. It is incredible. It's bioregional, set in Oklahoma, and deals with Native American things and dreams and archaeology and things of the mind, things of the ambient, ecology, deep time. It's very, very cool. Translation of things in the past that we can never fully understand, and these sorts of things. Brilliant story. Highly rate it. I do think the first time I read it, I was kind of off and on about it. I was like, I love some of this. I'm not sure about the rest, and over time, it's a pretty complete gem of a story as well. Once on Aranea. I forgot to say this copy that I have, which this is fun. It has illustrations in it. think it has like one at the beginning that is for a story in the midst of it that we'll get to called Dream or Dream World. Has one for this Once on Aranea. Pretty freaking cool. Yeah. And also true to the story. Not quite that exact kind of thing happens, but actually stuff grosser than that happens. So it's kind of a gross out, eventually gross out body horror science fiction story, because it's set on another planet and then the guy comes back to Earth right at the end. And it's kind of a minor tale from Lafferty in a way, but some of his minor tales are also some of my favorites just for what they do. So a little bit of space horror is awesome. Sodom and Gomorrah, Texas is one that I kind of liked at first and was like, okay, moving on. Now I really rate it highly. Again, my academic focus has been on Lafferty as an American writer, as a bioregional writer, and it to do with ecology and so on. So, I do tend to favor those stories, but I really think this is a quality tale regardless. Again, so it's like a Mexican man is the central character, and he just draws him so well and uses splashes Spanish throughout it in a really nice way. But about, again, about like sort of what counts as existing. It's about taking a census and in this area that's like allegedly like barely populated, but the Manuel keeps saying, should I take them all? As in, should I count everything? And he means like everything, all the animals, and furthermore, little people. And there's kind of like an Irish little people myth thrown in here, mixed with there are Native American little people myths, and then just set in this awesomely realized southwestern setting, desert type of setting with some really nice description. I'm gonna at some point talk about how Lafferty draws his Western America, and it's very, very different than a lot of the major authors that do that, like Cormac McCarthy or Willa Cather or something with their vast expanses and stuff. He does it in a very different way by and large, but here you get a little flavor, like some language that kind of crosses over nicely with somebody like Cormac McCarthy's Blood Meridian or something, and a bang of an ending and whatnot. Pretty cool. The Man with the Speckled Eyes is it's a good story. It's okay in a way, but its ending is just awesome. All But the Words it's an Institute for Impure Science story. It's fun, it's funny, and it's a good little story. But what fires for me about it is these little tiny things he does in the middle of it, where he talks about, because they're trying to like figure out how to communicate with distant aliens, and the complaint of some of the people in the story is that we're not communicating with the aliens of our own world, that is the rocks, the trees, the clouds, the insects, the birds, the whatever, and he does these little riffs on like the group mind of gathering thunderclouds, and the stress and the stressful thoughts or whatever of like the steel on a bridge as a what is that called, the engineering that goes into that or whatever, and like the thoughts of the spider, and and it's just, and I'm not doing it justice. I should have marked that bit so I could read it. It's really, really cool. So yeah, it's a good story and shows some of his focus on all the things. The Transcendent Tigers is a classic little, along with like 7 Day Terror from 900 Grandmothers and the Reefs of Earth and stuff, like precocious, wild little kids doing crazy stuff. This one it takes a minute to kind of really feel it almost. It's like a silly, funny little tale of a girl with powers that can poke a little ball with a needle, and it creates a hole in planet Earth that is like, basically, if you like poked a globe with a needle, it's like equivalent circumference, so maybe miles or something. This causes, volcanoes or whatever, and like destroys towns. It's really cool, man. And just a wild ride, and I'm not sure really what it's about, but A World Abounding is an interplanetary story. Got some cool stuff in it. Little, maybe not stilted, but I don't know. I don't rate that one as highly, but it's a good story. Dream is a really cool, weird. Everybody's having the same dream. It's a nightmare dream, and then it comes to this point where is that dream going to become the reality, and what we're living in become the dream, and it switches. I guess it sort of has a surprise ending. I don't know if you'd see it coming or not, but yeah, it's cool and got some grotesquerie and it's kind of disturbing little story. Ride a Tin Can is an absolute classic, 1970. That's another one actually. I think if this one didn't come out again, could be folded into 900 Grandmothers and complete the sense of that early Lafferty. And it's a really, these 1970 stories like Been a Long, Long Time and Ride a Tin Can give a really good indication. They kind of sum up the 60s Lafferty really well, have that kind of feel, and give a strong clue of where he's going in the 70s. So they're quite cool transitional tales in that way. And Ride a Tin Can is a devastating story, a post-colonial, anti-colonial sort of story from from a folklorist's point of view, mostly, who identifies with these indigenous aliens on a planet. And it is filled with these little micro tall tale myth fables that have a very indigenous flavor. I don't think it's appropriation because, Lafferty knew and personally and also studied and valued, his Native American neighbors and their culture and stuff. And he wrote a whole novel about it and other things. Not that he did everything perfectly and we can't critique him. Of course we can. But just in this instance, it's an invented sort of an indigenous thing, but it certainly draws on his experience with indigenous storytelling, both in his homeland in America, in Middle America, and also his experience of indigenous people on the islands in the South Pacific in World War II when he served there. And they're powerful. Ooh, they really hit you. I've never seen, Lafferty is filled with micro tales, micro tall tales, myths, and all that. And a lot of them are super powerful. One of my favorites I mentioned last time is Configuration of the North Shore, is one of his best. But there's something about these and their indigenous quality and the mythic resonance on them that I don't think he ever really did again or up to this level. So it's very special, and it's all about genocide of an indigenous people, and it hurts, and it's powerful, beautiful. Aloys or Alois, I don't know how to say that, Aloys, which is the main character in the story. This is another one that it's almost just a little piece of literary fiction that has a vague little science fictional type aspect to it. And it's a lovely little story about, it hits you. It's about sort of an academic or an outsider academic, I'm not sure, and his big ideas. And when they're listed out, they're really cool and fun. He talks about him, this wonderful line in there about him writing them on the back of a piece of butcher paper that had held lamb meat or something, and it's a funny little con man tale as well, and it's a quiet little but powerful little story. Entire and Perfect Chrysolite is very cool. It is doesn't work as well as some of his stories that deal with this kind of thing, sort of people taking. When we get a little later, I'm gonna say stuff about Lafferty and recreational drugs and things like that. He was a massive drinker, loved drinking, was a self-professed alcoholic, and knows what it's like to have your chemicals altered, and enjoyed it on that level. But for some reason had this thing against all other forms of chemical altering drugs. And some of his critiques of that kind of stuff are actually pretty awesome, even if they're, short-sighted and misinformed on some levels. And plus he does this thing where he expresses what it's like to trip or otherwise experience mind-altering drugs so effectively that I'm like, bro, man, you're not making the case you think you're making here. Anyway, this one doesn't work quite as well in that regard, but it's really cool, and it's you'll just have to get into it and see what you think. But it's kind of about cultural elites and indeed their kind of cultural appropriation through recreational drug use and different things like that. Encased in Ancient Rind, Now this is a cool story that kind of shows some of the weirdness Lafferty can get up to, where a canopy covers the earth and it changes the way flora and fauna are and kind of returns it to almost like a dinosaurs type time, and the characters themselves become sort of widened out and hardened and stuff, and they have these conversations at regular intervals, as often happens in Lafferty's fiction. It's really cool. It's maybe, well, it is about climate change. You know, who knows? Lafferty was just so so cantankerous and you know, he's not going to fit anywhere exactly, but it kind of packs a punch in terms of climate change, however Lafferty meant it. A story called The Ugly Sea, which is definitely just a literary story, with, you know, some mythical resonances to it, but it's just about, I've forgotten largely, I need to go back to it, but about a sailor and stuff and coming back home and things. And Cliffs That Laughed finishes it off, which is, you know, I need to go back to this one. I felt that in some ways maybe it's not the strongest of the strong, just in terms of like the full complete story and the writing, but in terms of what it does with storytelling and storytellers and stories within stories and all that kind of thing, it is one of his best, and it's so cool. And the cliffs that laughed are a woman's shoulders, I think, like her shoulders shake, like cliffs that laugh, you know, cliffs that laugh. You know, he does that kind of thing a lot. So there's Strange Doings. I've always liked this overall a little bit better than 900 Grandmothers. I think maybe my opinions changed a little bit where I almost rate them about the same. But I definitely want people to get on to this collection or stuff like it, however things turn out with his publishing, because, you know, you're going to get more. You're going to get more than, you're going to start to see him move on from what's in 900 Grandmothers. So I rate this also 9.5 out of 10. So I also have this copy of Strange Doings that Lafferty gets a lot of like drawings, illustrations that almost have like a kid-like quality or something, cartoonish quality or whatever. And some of them I really like and some of them I don't care for. And I can imagine people not liking this one, but I actually really like it. Stickiness from a library sticker or something that I couldn't get off there. But it's all kinds of stuff happening in the stories once you read them. Pretty fun. Kind of like a freaky, what's that the school story, the school cartoon. I can't think of what it's called. You'll tell me in the comments. From, what was that, the 70s or something? Anyway, so Strange Doings. And then for this video, we'll finish here with basically the end of Lafferty's stories being collected in a more mass market type of way. Except one last hurrah with a collection called Ringing Changes. It becomes more specialty press and stuff. So we've got, Does Anyone Else Have Something to Add? Which is a cool title. And I don't really have a great edition of this. This Scribner's one is pretty cool. Or is this Dobson? Can't remember. Scribner's. Now, here's, and I have found a lot of Lafferty fans that agree that, you know, this isn't as quality in a lot of ways as the other ones, or just doesn't have as many like bangers in there. Yeah. And when I went to the Lafferty archive, the archive of his manuscripts at Tulsa University, I noticed that there were letters from him where he had proposed tables of contents for any number of collections of his. And I'll see if I can find them, but his table of contents rule. And I can't believe they didn't use them. The whole issue is that Lafferty believes in his challenging, experimental, and wild sort of fiction. And I just think publishers at the time couldn't pull the trigger on that. They're like, oh, you know. So and they're more balanced, and the way they go through works really well in Lafferty's. But this editor had the idea to split the stories into this conceit of secret places and mean men. That's kind of fun, and it kind of works. But still, the selection is just okay. But there is great stuff in here. About a Secret Crocodile is a very good story. I had to warm up to it a little bit, but it's awesome, and it's about media manipulation and stuff like that in a really cool, like in a yarn sort of way. I have this collection of Galaxy magazine stories where it's got about a secret crocodile, and Lafferty does a really cool little intro to it that kind of talks about what he was trying to do, which is pretty awesome. So that's supposed to be a secret place, and then a mean men story is Madman, which is a very fun story. It's not, to me, it's not a top-notch story, but toward the beginning, guy's walking down the road all angry, and he kicks this dog, and it goes flying through the air, and he kicks an old lady's crutches out from underneath her, which is, why am I laughing at that? He makes you laugh at it. And then it's all this thing about androids and using their anger to like fuel something. I can't remember. Pretty good. Nor Limestone Islands is a very cool Lafferty tale. Almost up there with top tier stuff, but doesn't. Yeah. Anyway, but it's about a floating island up in the sky and reports on that and stuff, and it's really cool. And it's the story that ends with, because it explicitly has this sort of collage, or I'm trying to think of a better term, mosaic or something, sort of refrain to it about putting pieces together, and here's a piece, here's a piece, here's a piece, to try to get it to add up to a bigger picture, which, as I've said before, Lafferty talks about that at the beginning of Fall of Rome and other places, and it's a key thing about what Lafferty's entire body of work is doing. But that also happens on the individual story level too. But that's big. And to reference Professor Gregorio Montejo again, he's written a very long and complicated, but hard to read in some places, but exciting and thrilling, well-made essay about this. That's like 100 pages long in one of the Feast of Laughter journal zines of Lafferty fandom, about Lafferty as a bricolage artist. So this story gets into that, and it ends with the phrase, "Does anyone else have something further to add?" Because Lafferty's always inviting the readers to co-create the world with him. And so it's pretty cool. The Man Underneath is a really weird, cool story. It does some cool linguistic things about a magician and sort of somebody underneath him. It's been a while since I've read it. Boomer Flats is one of my all-time favorites. Again, a bioregional tale set in Oklahoma on the Cimarron River there, and it's about these guys who are recurring characters, scientists, pseudoscientists looking for cryptids, namely Bigfoot people, and they've searched for them and they can't find them, and they're like, maybe we've heard reports here. It doesn't seem like a likely place, Oklahoma, blah. Which he's like talking about his home state in a funny way. But they find these Bigfoot people, and that doesn't sound to me actually super exciting, I think. But it's really awesome. It's very funny, wry humor, very ecological, very bioregionally realized, but full of. I did a big chunk on this in my PhD, but so I won't try to get into it. But it's kind of cool about monsters and ecology and things like that, and really nice tall tale yarn type quality to it, but with great sophistication, and kind of packs a punch about spirituality and the landscape by the end, but in a weird way. Okay, let me say this part. What they end up doing is a flood comes, a sudden flood, which does happen in the Cimarron River, comes in. The Bigfoot people all go down into the river that's at low level and almost dried out, and lay down. And the uncles of the group, the biggest of them, come, and it's also local villagers, come and they put mud in their mouth and nose and eyes and ears, and then place giant rocks on them to hold them down. And let the flood come over them for 3 days, and then arise from it renewed. Yeah, it's cool. This Grand Carcass Yet, I think, is a very minor tale about intelligent computers that's still got some really cool stuff in it. In the Garden is another sort of planetary tale that is minor, I think, but has some funny moments and maybe some not great points of view in a way. Groaning Hinges of the World is a very awesome story about a changeover, literally, of underside people. The land moves and the topside people go under and the underside people go topside, and they're rapacious and murderous. It's often on an island somewhere, and it does some really cool things. You know, there's a moment where they chop off a guy's head and stick it on the prow of their ship, and the head tells them the way to get to his village. You know, that kind of thing. And Golden Trabant is also a minor tale about prospecting for gold on an asteroid that is quite cool. It's a minor tale, I think, is really quite cool, and almost got a hint of, just barely, like sort of space horror aspect to it. How They Gave It Back. I need to go back to this one, but it's about giving, I think, Manhattan Island back to the Native Americans. And I think it becomes like open hunting season on settlers, white settlers. Maybe, I'm not sure. It's, but it was interesting. Maybe Jones in the City, I think, again, a minor tale. See what I mean? Like, this just is not packing a punch. But it's a really cool theme that Lafferty visits a lot, and Maybe Jones, the character, comes up in Space Shanty. It's an interplanetary tale, but it's about like paradise and looking for it. It's cool, but it's just not super cool. Seven Story Dream is like a proper Chestertonian detective story that's really good. Yeah, it's really cool. Adam Had Three Brothers is another one. I think that's the other one that was first published in like 61 or something. That's the other thing. This collection just goes back and grabs old stories. It's like 74 at this point, and it's hardly grabbing this amazing stuff that Lafferty is doing in 1970, 71, 72, 73, 74. He's doing his best stuff ever, and they're just not even collecting it here in this collection. I'm telling you, the editors they did not have foresight. Adam Had Three Brothers, first published in New Mexico Quarterly, I believe. And it is kind of like a literary tall tale myth. I mean, it's like got a setting that's like modern 20th century somewhere, I think earlier 20th century and then maybe later. And it's a myth about Adam's three brothers and their sort of line or something. It's like a parahuman line. And it's something he comes back to a lot. But here it feels more like a literary tall tale-ish sort of story. And it's quite good. Maybe up there in the top stuff. Pig and a Pokey, totally minor, love it. Little planetary story about this kind of pig-like creature that collects human heads and other alien heads, and this guy that outsmarts him. Almost just like a fun, old-school SF adventure story, but with some Lafferty touches for sure. The Weirdest World is a very good story. Maybe some people rate it up there at the top. I think the problem was when I came to it, I already knew its conceit from a quote or something, and it just didn't land as much for me. But then later, it's a really cool, again, sort of bioregional tale. It's set in Florida, and there's like a reptile farm that this blob alien is on, and he's talking to the turtles and the snakes and whatever. But Lafferty does this awesome thing. He just does this every once in a while. He's very focused on animals. They're always a part of things, such a huge part of Lafferty's fiction, but only occasionally does he do this quick glimpse of what an animal consciousness might be like. And he does this particularly with the turtles here, where he has them talk, because the alien has the power to be able to translate any species language. And in English, they say things like water, 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 glub, glub, glub. Water, 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 glub, glub, glub. And a few other like words repeated. And that's kind of their mindset. And he talks about how they had a deep philosophy, but lacked inner fire or something like that. And he's like asking them, I just want to know, is this place called Florida? And they go, water, 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 glub, glub, glub. That's their answer. It's so cool. And it's not, sometimes when I say some of these funny things that Lafferty does, it might almost sound like it's just humor science fiction or comedy science fiction, or I don't know, vaguely. I haven't really read all the, Terry Pratchett or whatever, but maybe like that, or like, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy or something. And really it's very different than all that. It's more literary, I think. And it's always doing more than just humor. it just happens to also be funny. And when I summarize that kind of thing, it doesn't have quite the same power and mythic resonance as when you're just reading it in the story. Anyway, I rate that one quite highly, but I'm still not sure it's top tier. And then The Ultimate Creature is just under top tier for me, maybe even way down for other people. Again, an interplanetary story, but this one is very special to me. I loved it from the first time I read it and just thought, I don't know what it did in its ending. It's a man trying to find the most beautiful woman on every planet, or he actually accidentally runs into her and then he sort of courts her, but it ends on this completely strange note about them. He's a queer fish and she's a something. No, she's a queer fish and he's a something else. And the queer fish thing comes up in a couple stories as allegedly a sort of species, but more of a symbol. But it gets used a little differently in this one. And they're married and and they have like fish hybrid human children. It's just barely mentioned. It's not like, you know, this big realized science fiction idea, but they are harvesting them. They're calling them out of the water from playing and then like sort of eating them in the end. And it ends on this like lovely note of how happy they are or something. And you're like, wow, pretty cool. But just overall, like quite a weak collection. And I would rate it like, I don't know, 6 or 7 out of 10. I mean, it has some of his very best stories in it, you know, with continued on, or so was that in here? No, that was in the other one. With like Boomer Flats, or, you know, and even that one, I don't know that people would rate it as highly as I do, about a secret crocodile, you know. But, you know, yeah, I think this one can just go by the wayside. We don't need to republish it. We can collect these stories in different ways. Yeah, so maybe like 6 out of 10. And we'll stop there and get into the more specialty press stuff that comes out a little later after this. So thanks for tuning in, and tell me what you think of the stories and the story collections. We'll see you next time.